Hi, in this video we'll talk about the basics of using your iPad keyboard. I'm going to demonstrate how to use the keyboard using the Notes app. This is an app which Apple gives me and I can use it to take notes on just about anything. You can see that I've got a grocery list here, but let's say that I wanted to start another note. I'm just going to tap the plus button, which is going to start a new note, and one thing you'll notice is that the keyboard slides up from the bottom of the screen automatically. The iPad keyboard is context sensitive. It knows when you're working somewhere that needs you to type in information. So when you tap, for example, in the location field in the address bar in Safari, or when you start a note here in the Notes app, the keyboard slides in so that you can start typing. And then when you're done, you can make it go away. To make your keyboard disappear, you just tap this button in the lower right corner of the keyboard, the one with the keyboard symbol on it. And tapping it makes it go away. If I want to make the keyboard come back, I just tap somewhere that I need to start typing in, and the keyboard reappears. Now, the only exception to the question of whether the keyboard auto appears on my screen is if I've got a Bluetooth wireless keyboard attached. If I'm using an external keyboard, then the iPad thinks it doesn't need to show you the screen keyboard, which means it's going to give you more space to actually see what you're doing. If you ever do want that on-screen keyboard, though, when you're using your Bluetooth keyboard, all you need to do is press the eject button on the upper right corner of your physical keyboard, at least on the Apple-provided keyboard. It might be different on other manufacturers' keyboards. And when you do that, the on-screen keyboard should show up. The iPad keyboard, as I said, is actually context sensitive. That means a couple of things. First of all, it means there's multiple keyboards. You can see that the default keyboard that shows up is merely alphabetic. I have the option of my A through Z letters and a couple of punctuation marks. Where are all the other things I might want to type? Well, they're hiding behind a button. In the lower left, you can see a question mark, number 1, 2, 3, period button. When I tap that, it brings me into one of my other keyboards, the numerical keyboard, which also then gives me a bunch of other punctuation symbols that I can use. But you might notice there are still other punctuation symbols that don't show up there. Notice now that we have a button that has a hashtag, a plus, and an equal sign on it. Tapping that brings us into the third keyboard, which is the symbol or punctuation keyboard, where I've got all those other and frequently less used punctuation symbols at my disposal. And notice how the other buttons on the keyboard suddenly change to reflect what they're doing. So for example, if I wanted to go back to the keyboard with the numbers on it, there's now a button that says 1, 2, 3. I can just tap that and go back to the numerical keyboard. And if I wanted to go back to the alphabetical keyboard, there's a button that says ABC. I can just tap that and I'll be back. Your iPad keyboard can also change the keys depending upon what program you're in. Sometimes, for example, if you're in an app that asks you to type in an email address, it will actually put the @ sign here on your first alphabetic keyboard because that'll be really useful for you. And also when you're in Safari and you're visiting a website, typing in an address, you'll notice that there is a button that says .com. That way you can easily type in that part of the URL without having to actually type it out by letters. Your iPad keyboard also has a shift key. A lot of apps will actually detect when you're at the start of a sentence, and that's where I am now starting a new note. When I'm at the start of a sentence, you'll notice that my shift key has an arrow with a blue outline. That means that the first letter I type is actually going to be capitalized. So for example, if I type a word, you can see that the T is capitalized. But as soon as I type that T, the blue outline disappeared because it knew I didn't need to type anymore. And I can just keep typing to my heart's content. It is possible to use a shift or caps lock function on your iPad keyboard. To do that, all you need to do is double tap the shift key. And you'll notice that it turns bright blue to tell you that it's locked. Now, everything I type is actually going to be in caps until I once again tap the shift key. And the shift key works just like a normal shift key on your computer keyboard too. Anytime you need to capitalize a letter, just tap it once. And notice how when you tap it by yourself, it actually uses a blue arrow. That's different from when it thinks that you should automatically have something capitalized. I'm going to get rid of all that nonsense there. And I've got a sentence here. The dog is running. There's a feature on your iPad where if you're at the end of a sentence, You can manually, I suppose, type a period and a space to start a new sentence. But if I was to double tap the space bar, you would see that it does it automatically for me, sticks in that period and puts in a space. That is an optional setting, turned on by default, but which you can change in the Settings app. Let's type another sentence, and I want to show you two other features of the iPad's keyboard. Okay, the first thing I wanted you to see is that when I started typing, I typed the word let's, but I didn't put the apostrophe in there. The iPad detected that that word probably isn't actually in the dictionary. However, the contraction let's is, and it automatically replaced what I typed with the proper word. And I stopped here in the middle of the word together to show you that the iPad frequently will try to predict what word you're typing. Here, the letters I've typed can't really turn into too many other words besides together, and it uses that little floating box next to where I'm typing to suggest maybe that's what I'd like to do. Now, I can either accept its suggestion or I can get rid of it. To take it, all I have to do is press the space key or even like one of the punctuation marks on the keyboard, and that would accept it. If I didn't want to accept its suggestion, then all I would do is tap the little floating box on the screen and it would go away. Those are the basics of using your iPad's keyboard.